Hello, I'm Night Novel, your humble storyteller for this evening. Welcome to 𝘏𝐴𝐿 𝐿. This right here is a Gothic-themed visual novel that I found on itch.io, and it's one that I would very much like to share with you. Now, before we begin, a quick disclaimer. I'm not a professional voiceover artist. I'm not an actor. I just love good stories, and it looks like this could be one of them. So let's dive into this tale of friendship, sorrow, and bitter loneliness. Let's begin. Ooh, pretty. Lonely. Strangely lonely. Those words surfaced in her mind as she gazed up towards the towering trees, their branches extending forever in all directions. They made her feel so small and insignificant, like a frail leaf on the wind, at the mercy of wherever it took her. Lonely. There was no other way to describe this place. Oh, beautiful. There is no other way to describe the girl. Just a little while earlier, she had stepped out of her hired carriage, leaving the main road to explore these woods. Esther's driver had warned her that the forest was seldom visited, and if she ran out of supplies, she'd have to walk back to the road on foot and hope to flag down a stagecoach heading to the city. And that forest is haunted, girl. Dangerous for anybody, let alone someone with the 𝘏𝐴𝐿. I wouldn't head in there if I were you, and seeing as it's almost evening, I'll take you back to town for free. But she'd refused the driver's offer, turning away from her last hope. It was impossible. The decision would haunt her forever, a hanging mystery of what she might have discovered. No matter how isolated or helpless these vast woods made her feel, she promised herself she wouldn't leave without answers. Oh my, look at that. A light breeze brushed past Esther's cheeks. It carried the fragile scent of spring, though a lingering, wintry chill still blanketed the forest. Spring always made her symptoms worse somehow. As everything gathered its energy to bloom and flower, her lethargy only seemed to become deeper and darker. The more vibrant Esther's surroundings grew, the more she felt her energy draining away. Some days she barely had the strength to even move. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to hate the season. It hardly seemed fair to be angry at the world for turning its cycles, for life continuing on around her, just like it always had. Even now, she still remembered when spring was her very favorite time of all. All right, be safe, girl. Esther suddenly came to a halt. She felt a strange sensation under her boots. Had she stepped on something just now? Bending down, she curiously patted the forest floor, searching for whatever it was. After a moment, her fingers brushed something small and cold. A key? What was a key doing out here, in the middle of nowhere? Puzzled, Esther turned the tiny, shimmering piece of metal over in her palm. No marks, symbols, or engravings. It could have belonged to anyone or anything. After a long moment, she rose slowly back to her feet, slipping the key into her skirt pocket. Perhaps it was a good omen. She'd always had a hard time with superstition or questions of fate, preferring the calm logic of cause and effect to anything unseen. But these days, as the world's reality seemed to grow ever bleaker, Esther found herself hoping for something more. It didn't really matter whether things like omens or destiny were actually real, as long as they made life a little less unforgiving. Alright, we're out here looking for a cure. With a small flicker of hope in her heart, Esther turned to carry on once more. She had no map, no directions, and almost no clue as to what she was searching for. Only the faintest trail of a possible cure. Oh, wow. As the hours passed by, all sense of time was devoured by a sea of unending trees. The forest's dreamy springtime varnish faded to a ghostly gloom, the cheerful bird song replaced by rustling crickets and distant ominous howls. A painful sting suddenly shot across Esther's arm. It yanked her out of her absent-minded wandering, back into the oppressive emptiness of the forest. After a moment, she realized she'd walked too close to the brambles. Warm droplets oozed down her wrist, an uncomfortable reminder to always watch her step. Oh, you gotta be careful. As Esther gazed down at the small, welling beads of blood on her flesh, her surprise began to shift into a sense of gnawing doubt. Perhaps she really had gone too far after all. If there really was anything, or anyone, within these woods, she should have stumbled across it by now. And if the rumors were false, just another folk tale made from empty hope, spinning more empty hope in a vicious cycle. Was all of this nothing but a dead end? Had her whole journey been pointless? Would she have to tell them she'd failed? Idiot, Esther muttered aloud, struck by a sudden sense of self-loathing. Those harsh thoughts could be dealt with later, but she couldn't keep stumbling through the darkness so pointlessly. Failure or not, it didn't change where she was now. She had a flint and steel in her satchel, along with a little water and rations. If she gathered some loose branches, at least she could make a fire to keep warm. It wasn't the first night Esther had spent alone in the middle of nowhere, and it surely wouldn't be the last. Oh, I'm just gonna gush over this whole game. Slowly, cautiously, she crept through the thick underbrush. The moon's faint glow offered enough light for Esther to find a few branches long and dense enough for a campfire. But every time she crouched down to forage, her fingers searching through the cold, damp earth, it felt like someone was breathing right behind her ear. Esther shook off the ghostly sensation with a deep shudder. It was just the old rumors she'd heard. They were finally getting under her skin. Foolish tales of primeval spirits guarding the forest, devouring the soul of anyone who ventured too deep. Of course, Esther never gave any credence to those stories, nor would anybody with common sense for that matter. Ghosts simply didn't exist. Still, the sooner she had a fire, the better. Oh, that was a nice way of displaying the text. At last, Esther spotted a clearing just beyond the trees. With a bundle of sharp branches cradled in her arms, she hurried out into the open, anxious to finally set up camp. Let me guess. But as she stepped into the glade and the shadows gave way to shapes, She froze. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, not a big haunted manor house. There, right in front of her eyes, a beautiful, aged house rose amidst the darkness. It stood like an elusive mirage in the desert, too perfect and out of place to be true. Was it an illusion? Or by some miracle, had she actually found the apothecary's estate? But surely the place was abandoned. It gave off an atmosphere far too lonely and desolate to be inhabited. Esther could barely discern any of its features, so thick were the shadows that shrouded the house's mountainous shape. A thick, swirling mist consumed the earth around its foundation, seeping across the ground like some poisonous cloud searching for intruders. Like its very presence was waiting to reject her. This had to be it. A place that had evaded all maps, and yet she'd simply stumbled upon it. Something about that idea made a sense of deep apprehension crawl down her spine. Understandably, in a trance between fear and fascination, she found herself moving across the clearing towards the manor entrance. The pale mist seeped around Esther's boots, swallowing her footsteps one by one. It felt like entering a dream, as if she were slowly crossing the threshold into a different reality. Until she realized that her fingertips were suddenly brushing cold metal. The handles for those foreboding doors loosely grasped beneath her uncertain, trembling palms. Please. The soft, nearly inaudible word left her lips like a whispered prayer. Slowly, gingerly, the handles began to turn. Until, with a softly beckoning creak, the doors yawned open to allow Esther within. Oh, no, 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 no. Inside the house, the scent of musty aged wood greeted her from the darkness. Just barely, Esther could make out the shape of a stairwell, illuminated by rays of moonlight. Something about it compelled her. Or perhaps it was simply less frightening than exploring past the pitch-black archway ahead. After a hesitant pause, she closed the doors behind her. The wind had started howling faintly, casting an eerie echo through the manor's foyer. Slowly, Esther crept up the stairs, wincing at the small creaks that followed her movements. The second floor held a number of rooms, their doors all ominously closed. On a nervous whim, Esther decided to reach for the second door on the right, inching it open with bated breath. Oh, the vacant room was a study. As her eyes drifted around the dark space, she could see rows of shelves stuffed with books, a cluttered desk, tables full of dusty alchemy equipment. A study. Esther's heart leapt in her chest. Even though the apothecary was no longer here, what if they had left some of their research behind? With the light of day, she could comb through these books and papers. Surely there had to be something of use in them. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a glimmer of hope to cling on to. Allowing herself a heavy sigh of relief, Esther closed the door behind her and stepped towards the small cot nearby. Cold as it was, at least she'd have a roof over her head and a bed to spend the night on. As if on cue, she felt a wave of exhaustion blanketing her mind. Maybe it was time to take her medicine and sleep. Even a few hours would be enough. What was that? A creak? Esther froze, every inch of her body suddenly petrified. Oh no, don't you do this to me. Creak, creak, creak. Something was right outside the door. A chilling tightness gripped Esther's chest. She couldn't breathe. Every instinct in her body told her to stay utterly silent. Don't let it sense you. Don't get caught. Don't move. Don't... Without warning, the door burst open. She had no choice but to look and see... Oh, it's a little girl. And she's screaming and I have to voice her now. Well, that's wonderful. Ah! Not a monster or a ghost. Only a young girl, trembling in obvious fright. You're... Who are you? Her fright slowly fading, the girl stared wide-eyed at Esther, still shaking a little. She'd probably been expecting to see a ghost too, and they ended up scaring each other equally. I'm Esther. Esther? That's your name? Esther nodded. And you're real? This isn't a dream, is it? No, I don't think so. An awkward silence followed their strange conversation. Esther found herself wondering if maybe this actually was a dream after all. Really, it almost seemed too surreal to be anything else. After a long few moments, the girl's expression began to soften. She took a small, hesitant step towards Esther, then another, and another. I can't believe it. Another person came here. A real girl right in front of me. This is so exciting. She is adorable, though. Baffled, Esther gazed down at the delighted, warm face beaming up at her. My name's 𝐶𝐚. I'm so happy to meet you, Esther. I was getting a drink from the well, so I didn't see or hear you come in. You must have thought the house was empty, right? I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to scare you, but 𝐶𝐚 let out a small, nervous laugh, toying with the ribbons on her dress. You're the first person I've seen in 6 years. I never expected to find someone else inside the house, especially not in this room. Had Esther heard her right? 𝐶𝐚 had been living alone here for 6 years? Was it possible that she was the apothecary the rumors talked about? Oh, you haven't eaten yet, have you, Esther? You look so tired and hungry. Gasping softly, 𝐶𝐚 reached out to clasp Esther's hand between her Gasping softly, 𝐶𝐚 reached out to clasp Esther's hand between her tiny palms. I'll light the fireplace, and you can get warm while I make some supper. That sounds nice, right? Come, let's go downstairs. All right. Taken aback by 𝐶𝐚's eager offer, Esther hesitantly nodded. Even though she wanted to ask what 𝐶𝐚 knew about the cure, her stomach rumbled noisily at the thought of a warm dinner. It wouldn't hurt to wait until they'd eaten, surely. Oh, this is so wonderful. We're gonna have I'm so ready for where this story is gonna take us. Still holding Esther's hand, 𝐶𝐚 led her back downstairs and into the parlor. As soon as she'd stuffed some wood into the fireplace and set it alight, the darkness suddenly lifted, melting into a cozy warmth thanks to the fire's cheerful crackling. Before she really knew what was happening, Esther found herself wrapped up in a pile of blankets, sitting on the couch before the hearth. 𝐶𝐚 seemed like a little blur of happy energy, fuzzing over Esther one moment, then hurrying back to the kitchen to check on her soup. Clearly, she was delighted to have a visitor. Esther felt a little embarrassed, at a loss for how to deal with this unexpected kindness. Here we are. Eat it while it's warm. Before long, 𝐶𝐚 was nudging a bowl of steaming soup into Esther's hands. Filled to the brim with brightly colored vegetables and dark broth, it had a delectable scent rich with herbs and spices. Thank you. You don't need to thank me. There's plenty more in the pot if you're still hungry, so don't be shy. Oh, that reminds me. I have to clean the stove before my lamp goes out. I'll be right back. And then she was gone again, her light footsteps pattering over to the kitchen. As Esther gratefully ate her supper, she could see 𝐶𝐚's figure darting back and forth, sipping a bowl of soup with one hand while she scrubbed the stove with her other. At first, Esther found it almost impossible to believe. A small girl like 𝐶𝐚 living by herself in the wilderness, taking care of the whole manor. But from the natural, precocious way she seemed to handle everything, it didn't take long to realize she was in her element. Most of the older girls and boys from the city wouldn't be able to last a week out here without access to any of the normal comforts they took for granted. And yet, even whilst she toiled to beat the dwindling lamplight in her kitchen, 𝐶𝐚 looked as contented as a buzzing bee in a field of flowers. I like the flowery language. Phew. A few minutes after Esther finished her meal, 𝐶𝐚 wandered back into the parlor, wearing a satisfied smile. Kitchen is clean and you've eaten. I hope the fire got you nice and warm too. It did. Thank you again for taking care of me. Oh, please don't worry about it. Really, Esther. Actually, she gave a tiny sheepish laugh, her pale cheeks turning slightly pink. I already cleaned the stove yesterday, but I was so excited and nervous from meeting you that I had to calm down a little bit. Cleaning always makes me calmer, so I'm glad I have a big house like this. It always gives me lots to do. I'm sure the house is glad to have you too. I really hope so. Beaming brightly, 𝐶𝐚 flopped down on the cushions beside Esther, dangling her legs over the sofa's edge. Another short, awkward pause soon followed. 𝐶𝐚 fidgeted a little, staring at the fireplace intently, as if she were too shy to start off the conversation again. Oh. After a hesitant pause, Esther decided to finally break the silence. She had to ask the question that had burned in her mind from the moment they'd met. 𝐶𝐚, Are you the apothecary that lives in these woods? Esther's words made 𝐂𝐚 abruptly stiffen. Where did you hear about an apothecary? In one of the towns nearby. People said there was a hermit living out here. I'm British now, deal with it. An apothecary who used to live in the city. Somebody who had found a cure for the pale. All of 𝐂𝐚's cheerful energy seemed to slowly dissipate. Her gaze drifted down to the floor, lingering there as if anchored by a heavy weight. I'm sorry, Esther. The apothecary, it's not me. It's... 𝐂𝐚 grasped the fabric of her dress, squeezing it tightly. It was my father. It's true that he had the pale and he managed his symptoms for a while, but he died 6 years ago. Just like that, disappointment shattered Esther's heart. But even more acutely, she felt a sudden pang of sympathy for 𝐂𝐚. How it must have felt to lose her father, so young, living all alone in this deep forest. I'm sorry. 𝐂𝐚 gave her a small, sad smile, gently shaking her head as if to reassure Esther it was all right. But she offered no other reply and stayed unusually silent, swallowing hard once or twice. I'll leave tomorrow morning then. There's no reason for me to cause you any more trouble. You could still stay here. What? She stared at 𝐂𝐚 in surprise, taken aback by the girl's sudden interjection. I mean, stay here to look at Papa's research. He has a lot of papers and books in his study, and journals too, although he told me never to look at them. But Papa spent a lot of time working, and I know he took notes about the pale. So if you stay and read through them, you might find something about the cure, right? Her voice quivering slightly, 𝐂𝐚 turned to gaze at Esther with a hopeful, eager smile. Thank you, but I don't want to stay here and be a burden. Oh, Esther, you'd never be a burden. You barely ate anything and you're so quiet and kind. Really, why don't you stay? Esther gave her a hesitant look. As much as she wanted to accept 𝐂𝐚's kind offer, it just didn't seem right. After all, 𝐂𝐚 obviously worked hard to take care of this place, but Esther didn't have any way to repay her hospitality. Well, if you're going to be very stubborn about it, you can help out with chores during the day and look over Papa's research after. As if she'd easily guessed the source of Esther's reluctance, 𝐂𝐚 gave her a reassuring, cheerful nod. I have a lot of food and wood stored from the winter still, anyway, so it's really fine. Please, don't worry about it. Esther studied 𝐂𝐚's expression, those shining eyes that were still all but begging her to stay. At least if she helped out with the work, she'd feel better about spending a week or two here, even if it still struck her as taking advantage of 𝐂𝐚's loneliness. All right. You're sure I won't be burdening you? Yes. Oh, yes, I'm positively, absolutely. Halfway through her delighted cry, 𝐂𝐚 suddenly cut herself off with a gasp. Oh, I forgot. You have it, right? The pail. Esther nodded, puzzled at 𝐏𝐚𝐥𝐞's sudden question. I won't ask you to do any chores then. That wouldn't be fair. Papa told me how awful it always made him feel. He couldn't even get out of bed some days. It must be terrible, being so drained all the time, no matter how much rest you get. It's fine, I can work. But to be honest, the longer I don't do anything, the worse I feel. It's hard to push myself, but it's better than when I don't. It was 𝐏𝐚𝐥𝐻's turn to hesitate, but Esther offered a small, determined smile to reassure her it was all right. She hated when people pitied her or went easy on her. It bothered Esther even more than the symptoms themselves. If you're sure, then. You know yourself better than I do, it's true. She giggled, clearly overjoyed that Esther had agreed not to leave. Then it's a deal? You'll stay and go over Papa's research and help me out with work during the day? After a brief pause, Esther dipped her head in silent agreement. Oh, well, motorcycle man agrees. We'll start tomorrow then. I'm so excited. I can show you the well, the gardens, the stream, the cemetery. We can pick flowers and have a picnic and read by the fireplace and... She trailed off, biting her lip with a dawning look of embarrassment. Sorry. I get a bit carried away sometimes. It's all right. She is the cutest freaking thing that exists in this... For a long pause, they were both silent again. But the pause was warmer, gentler, like one between friends. The fireplace's soft crackling echoed in the parlor, a comfort against the howling wind outside. Well, you're probably exhausted, aren't you? Why don't you sleep here by the fire? I can bring more blankets so you can have a good night's rest. I think I have enough blankets. Esther mumbled, still cocooned in the numerous woolly sheets 𝐏𝐚𝐥 had wrapped around her earlier. You may say that now, but you can never have too many blankets. It gets quite drafty in here at night. Huddling a little deeper into the warm covers, Esther offered 𝐏𝐚𝐥 a small, grateful smile. This story right here. I'm loving it so much. But we've passed the 30-minute mark, and that's about where I'm going to try to have my videos be at. So with that, we close the page on this evening's story. But there is still more left to tell. So stay safe, take care of yourself, and please, return here whenever you wish. This is Night Novel, signing off.